know whether to say to people that actually it was you who actually got me to be CEO, and not just because you're my cheerleader, but because I actually applied for your job and didn't get it, nearly got it, but didn't get it. The job I really wanted was your job, and I went for your job and it got down to the last two. But that after that, it was like, that's it now. I've got to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm Debi Marriott-Lavery, and this is Beyond the Dots podcast, episode 5, Educator, with my friend and absolute love of my work life in terms of just what a genius, Jane Ashcroft CBE. Okay, cool. So, Jane Ashcroft CBE, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited to be part of this very esteemed group of people. I've been watching your podcasts with great interest.
Oh, yeah, but you're like super royalty now. So we're really excited to have. And you met royalty, which we can talk about like later on. You actually met royalty. Yeah. So thank you for agreeing to be on Beyond the Dots podcast. This is all about my inner circle, and you have been a major part of my inner circle. I don't know if you know that actually, but you have been a major part of my inner circle for a number of years. So yeah, so this is Jane, and Jane and I met in 2007. Did you know it was 2007?
I was trying to remember. I thought it must be around then. Yeah, gosh. That's a long time.
It is a long time. It's a long time. So yeah, so in 2007, I went to work for Jane, and Jane was the then MD of Anchor Trust, as it was called then. And that was my first foray into housing.
Yes. Yeah, I remember it well. I can remember your interview. I can remember being blown away by, because you were a breath of fresh air, and we were looking for somebody to help sort out a home care service that really needed sector experience, commercial nous, people skills, great leadership. And to do that as part of a much bigger organisation. And for me personally, I was really struggling with what to do with this. And so it was a blessing when you walked in and you had all of those skills and all of that energy. Yeah, it might be a long time ago, but it still feels quite fresh, doesn't it, in many ways?
Oh, it's massively fresh. And what I love about it is that, as I say, for me, it was the first foray into housing, for sure, going from that health and social care and then into health, social care and housing, which I really wanted to do. And it was the first time I'd worked for an organisation that was not for profit or not for dividend, a charity. And so that was really exciting. And then I met you, and it was the first time that I'd had a female boss, really. And there'd been a few, obviously, in kind of the health service and what have you. But the fact that you were really my first kind of female boss and role model, and you have been for some time. And the fact that we still get on all these years later.
Yeah, I think we get on better and better, don't we? I think one of the really interesting things about you and I is we're able to work together. We've worked together and we have a friendship. And I've got a couple of people, like you talking about your inner circle. You think about, who is in my gang? Who's in my inner circle? And that's one of the things that makes it work, is when you can absolutely do the work conversation. Because we had some tough stuff to deal with at work. Inevitably, that's what life's like. And you have a kind of personal relationship that can cope with that. And I think it would be really interesting to try and distill what makes that work. And I suppose I hadn't thought about being your first, or as you say, female boss. It's only now at this stage in my career, so in my kind of late 50s, as I'm in my portfolio phase, that I realise more and more. A lot of people say to me, you were my first female boss, or you were a role model. I think if I'd realised I was a role model, it would have terrified the what's this out to me. But I also can think about the people who, and so my first female boss in some ways was when we had a female chair at Anchor. I guess I'd not had really a female boss until then. Thank goodness the world's moved on. We might not be where we would all completely like to be, but there's I'm not usually the only woman in the room anymore. And actually, in those Anchor days that you're talking about, there would be quite often times in external meetings, interestingly, in the care sector more than the housing sector, where a group of senior people, I was likely to be the only woman in the room. Whereas housing had felt more a little bit further down the road on what we would now call the diversity agenda. But in the olden days, we used to talk about equal opportunities.
Because of course, because you started from a personnel, from HR people background, didn't you? That's where your career started.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Also, I've had an accidental career. If I was to write my memoir, which I'm not going to do, no, I don't think so. But perhaps an accidental career might be a title for it, really, because started off just wanted to be a teacher. Just that's what I was going to do. So I loved school. I was going to stay at school, really. Wanted to be a teacher. Did my teaching practice and discovered that I really wasn't enjoying it. So I then had to pivot and think, oh, blimey, I've been a student. I had this life plan. I'm really not enjoying teaching and I'm not very good at it. So what do I do? So I end up on a graduate scheme in the electricity industry that I know nothing about. And they support me to study for a qualification in governance. What a sexy CV this is. Governance, HR, I tell you. So I start off in kind of governance, go through the privatization of electricity, doing all kinds of shareholdery stuff and really interesting stuff. And then in the electricity company I was in, they moved me into what was then called personnel, which I really enjoyed. They moved me. It was a bit of an accident. Then I moved to a housing association, not actually knowing what a housing association was, but seeing a job that looked like good progression for me as an HR person. And I accidentally fall into housing and think, wow, this is brilliant. I love this. And then I start getting involved in things. I had a corporate services job, so I had really sexy stuff. Facilities, the car fleet, insurance, corporate governance, really sexy stuff. In Bromford, which was and still is a fabulous organisation. And then decided that because I was having a great time at Bromford, nothing ever went wrong. So from an HR point of view, I wasn't getting the experience of the tough stuff. The culture was great. The organisation was pretty good at all of the developmental stuff, the performance stuff. I never got near a tribunal. I don't think we had any disciplinaries. And so there's a certain perverse moment in my late 20s when I go, okay, you have to do some tough stuff. And I got a job in a care home group and I landed on the first day. I'll never forget. I landed on the first day and they haven't had a personnel director before. Quite a big care home group, doesn't exist anymore. It's in that format. And my newly appointed secretary said, these are the tribunal claims we've got. She pushed these files toward me. There were 16 tribunal claims. And she said, I think the first hearing might be tomorrow. As she backed out of the room. And I thought, okay. And so I landed in care and I discovered that care was fascinating. And if you're interested in people, it was really incredible. And then an opportunity came along to apply for a job with Anchor. And I thought, blimey, housing and care. Those are really interesting. Like you, these are components that I've seen separately. I wonder how they work together. So my career has just been a series of generally happy accidents without much of a plan to it. And all starting with a swotty little girl who really liked being at school and I thought I'd just stay at school for my life really and become a teacher. But no, it was not to be.
It was not to me, was it? And that's really interesting that you say that, because what I've been doing with this series of podcasts as well is it's a leap for me from becoming the CEO a year ago. And you were a massive cheerleader of me to encourage me to do that as well, which we can come on to. So I did a podcast around that, finally taking the leap to do it. And then I've been doing a series of interviews and discussions with people who have helped me become the CEO that I am today and stuff. And that's why I wanted to talk to you. And I've been but I've been attaching like labels to who those people are for me, things like coach and kind of innovator and when I was thinking of you, I was thinking, funnily enough, educator was the thing for me that I thought, you've been a massive educator to me. And then I was doing, even though I know you very well, I was doing sort of research and stuff, because you do know, don't you, that we are what Google says we are. That is the truth, okay? So I Googled you, odds, just to see, it comes up, CBE, the whole thing. And there's an interview with you in the Financial Times that says, if you weren't the CEO, the great kind of CEO that you are today, what would you be? And you said a teacher. And so that whole kind of education piece, that I feel that you've been a real educator to me. I see how you've educated organizations, the sector. You're so well known within the sector. And ultimately, that whole kind of swotty little girl who was the teacher, who didn't like teaching, it's clearly still stayed with you. It's my thing.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I think what I like learning, and I still like learning. I'm always trying to do new stuff and I read a lot and I like watching people and learning from people. So I think actually the thing I didn't like about teaching was the discipline and the kind of carrot and stick approach to rewarding and also a bit about my experience of teaching practice, which was in the late 80s. There was quite a lot of, there were the kids that you focused on because they had something, they were talented and they were going somewhere. And there was a bit of and the kids that haven't got much, just don't waste too much time on them. And I think I was, the kind of, the bit of social justice in me somewhere was really furious about the sense that some people were people being written off at secondary school at the age of 11 kind of thing. So I didn't like some of the structures of teaching. I really admire great teachers. I've got lots of friends who are teachers, obviously, because I trained with them, and I watch them and see how much difference they make to young people's lives and how much reward they get from that. And I think, thank goodness they're teachers and thank goodness I'm not. But perhaps what I took from the experience was really that learning, how you help people to learn and how everybody learns differently. I guess that's the other thing. A typical education system, whatever the education system is, does try and make things very sort of standard. Whereas actually all of my experiences, there's a range of learning styles. As an HR professional, I could run you through some learning styles.
Remember them?
Yeah, isn't it? Is it honey? Is it honey, the learning styles? Anyway, a long time ago. But really, learning how to learn and being a good learner and helping people to learn. And it's so good seeing you finally as a chief exec, because I could see the seed of the chief exec. Yeah, absolutely. You can see when you work with people, can't you? You can, and you'll be doing this all the time, people's skills and their aptitudes. And often the thing that's holding them back is them. We've all been through that. It's that I can't possibly do that. And I worked, the chief exec of Bradford, who I worked for in the 90s. I remember a really important conversation with him, Mick Kent, and he was talking to me about expanding my role. So I was the HR manager, and he was saying, I think you should do some other stuff as well. These exotic things like facilities and car fleet, and also actually, and to be the company secretary, which was really great because it meant I was at the board.
Did you on car park as well? Were you head of car park?
I didn't have a high-vis vest, but I probably have quite like one. But yeah, all that kind of stuff. But also, he was really talking to me about being company secretary and being in the board and supporting the board, which of course was brilliant experience. And I remember saying to him, but I'm turning 25. And he said, if you're good enough, you're old enough. And that's always stuck with that. If you're good enough, you're old enough. And that works both ways as well. Not just I'm only 25, but equally now I'm heading for 60. I'm still, if I'm good enough, I'm old enough or indeed young enough. I think helping people to learn and encouraging people to lean into their skills and perhaps challenge themselves a bit, when I look back, has been something, and it probably did come from the teacher training, the working with young people. So yeah, I was very flattered when you said that you thought of me as an educator. I think for me, that's really rewarding that you see me in that way.
Oh no, like honestly, 3,000,000%. I've learned so much from working with you, but also just being your friend and just seeing you as a person develop. And almost, it's a real comfort that there are times, the whole kind of accidental career thing, you are just by the very nature of you, just very humble, but actually what you have achieved in your career is phenomenal. And just seeing how you've navigated your way through that, through some very difficult times, and the resilience that you've had, because that was always the thing for me as well. I always used to think, even if I wanted to, even if I think I have all the skills and the energy and the ability and the capability to do this, do I have the resilience to be a CEO? Because it's tough. It's really tough and it's lonely and it's hard. But it was you that I channeled with that, because I could see it was always like, how would Jane deal with this? How does Jane cope with this? Because let's face it, you are what Google says you are. So let's do this. So you spent a lot of time in you've got a lot of kind of column inches about how much money that you earned.
Yeah. And that's horrible. And in some way, so it's interesting. We talk a lot about resilience now, don't we? Thank goodness. It's good that we talk about this, because when I got the anchor chief exec job, so what was that? 2009-10. So I was made acting chief exec in 2009. So again, accidental. This was not me applying for a job. This was a change in the organization and the chairman saying to me, we've got a temporary gap. Somebody's going to have to be acting chief exec. It's you. And it's Monday morning and you're it. And in some ways, that didn't give me time to think about it, and that perhaps wasn't a bad thing. So that happened very suddenly. And then there was a full recruitment process, quite rightly, an amazing job. So external recruitment process, and I applied. And I think that was like the end of October, early November, and the final interviews were the beginning of March. And during that period, so I was being the acting chief exec. I'd had a conversation with the chairman about, so how do you want me to do this? Is this a holding brief? Just don't break anything. And he said, yeah, don't break anything, but keep moving the organisation forward. We can't sit and wait. So I was enjoying myself to some extent, but very conscious I was acting chief exec and there was this process running. And I was very sure that I wouldn't be successful in the process. And that was logic saying, this is a big chief exec job. So Anchor was one of the, top 5 housing associations by turnover, the complexity of quite a lot of units, and also the care home service and the home care. And so
people services as well, don't underestimate that. It's
So,
very influential as an organisation.
yeah. I mean, it is a special
How many
organisation.
prime ministers have you met? And we've had a few, to be fair. How many actually have you met?
Not so many of the recent ones. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 4. I've met
Four.
minister.
You did meet Boris.
I did. And I did attempt to talk to Boris about social care reform. And nobody was surprised to hear that Boris told me that it had been sorted out. So it's good that we can all rest assured on that.
Yeah, we did. We all slept well in our beds that night, didn't we?
Yeah. So
Sure.
that's reassuring. Gosh, how little some things change. Yeah, I was really sure. Logically, the person I was going through the process, but this was going to go to somebody who'd been a chief exec before and probably had more background in housing than I did. And so and then my heart was going, and you're not ready? God, you can't do this, really? So I gave it my best shot, but I was convinced I wouldn't get the job, to the extent that the final interviews were on a Monday morning. And I knew they were seeing loads of people. I'd been told to come in for my interview into the office, but then to make myself scarce for the rest of the day because there was a kind of understandable confidentiality about applicants and stuff. And the Friday before, we'd had a kind of management conference-y get-together somewhere in Leeds, I think. We'd had a really good day, and quite a few people knew where I was at in the process, and several people had wished me all the best, which was really kind of them. But I knew in my head and my heart, I knew that Monday, the interviews, so probably by the end of the following week, I would know that I hadn't got the job and I would have to face it. And I thought, and that probably means I won't be around because it's difficult. So I cried all the way home on that Friday. I can remember driving down the M1. Now, the M1 was pretty awful and it was raining. But I do remember I was really emotional all the way home because I think I was saying goodbye to Anchor and I was, and I cried on. And then I had an okay weekend. On the Sunday, I reviewed my presentation that I'd been asked to give, the fairly classic, if you were the chief exec, what would your priorities be for the first 3 years? And in some ways, I think it really did me good because when I went in on the Monday morning, I went in as a candidate because I had this kind of letting go thing. And I was still incredibly surprised when at the end of the Monday, Chairman asked me to go and see him. And I think we were both surprised when he offered me the job. I think I then burst into tears. I sound like somebody, you've never seen me. I don't mind being emotional at work, but I'm not hugely teary. So having spent all afternoon Friday on the way home crying, I then burst into tears. And the chairman was a chap called Dalvey. And Aman he'd worked for the Housing Corporation. He was a senior manager at Tower Hamlets. He's very well known, still working. He's now got lots of non-exec roles in the housing sector. We're still in touch. And I remember him looking at me and I said to him, I promise I'll never cry on you again. I'm sorry. I'm just so surprised. And I saw him a couple of weeks ago for lunch and I said, I did live up to my promise. I never cried on you again. It's the classic. Blimey, they appointed a woman chief exec, and that's the first thing I did. I burst into tears. Anyway, yeah, it was. And so I then went through that period of when you're becoming a chief exec, and it's such an absolute thing. Because although everybody knew I was new, you don't get any time. Nobody says, oh, we'll give her 6 months to decide what she wants to do about this. I did feel there was a really interesting, it is quite an absolute thing being a chief exec, and you have a kind of responsibility to the organisation and to the role title to fill it, but also to be kind to yourself and think you can't do everything straight away.
You were also such a great network. You've been nominated or named a number of times, haven't you? One of the most influential people in healthcare, the 50 top individuals in healthcare.
I suppose partly because I have found a space in kind of housing and care that matters. So because I care about what I do and I'm passionate and I want to learn, then the networking is almost a consequence of that, because I'll always go and find somebody that knows something about stuff. So it's back to the learning thing, really. You and I used to talk about networking, and because
I hate it.
Yeah, I'm not doing that. Don't make me go and talk at that conference. I can remember you used to.
Still like that now, to be fair.
You say, well, look at you. You're brilliant at that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? People are surprised when we say, I said to you, I'm a bit nervous about doing this today. I still feel, and I've done loads and loads of public speaking and stuff, but it's human to feel a little bit nervous about those things. But generally for me, I don't need a network for the sake of a network. It's about finding interesting people and also a variety and a diversity and different views. Oh, and actually that takes me back, because actually you started here on resilience and my column in She's Cat.
Well, I did. Yeah. Yes.
And I elegantly waltzed away from that. Yeah, that whole kind of what you paid stuff. Again, it's a kind of head and heart thing, because personally it's horrible. I don't want to be in people's mind and measured because I'm in this sort of top 5 highest paid chief executive housing associations. And you can go slightly mad if you do if you compare it with this sector or that sector, or if Anchor was a FTSE company, it'd be a FTSE 250. And by the way, and there comes a point, I think, where resilience is partly just accepting the things that you cannot do much about. And as long as you personally feel comfortable with it, it's that what's my own value driver. As chief executive Anchor, I was well rewarded. My biggest concern was when frontline colleagues would be being harangued about that. So I remember going to one of our housing services once when there'd been I think it's Daily Mail, which had a go. And one of the scheme managers had a hard time from some of the residents there about what I was paid. And that made me feel really uncomfortable, because I wanted to pay scheme managers more money and I didn't want them to be having to defend my salary. That was totally wrong. So those kind of things. And I was really lucky at Anchor to have a really good comms director, Mario, who's still there. He's fab. And Mario and I used to talk about how actually the internal comms of these things were more important to me than the external. The Daily Mail can have a go and all of that kind of stuff. But actually, I didn't want colleagues in the organisation to have to cope with that.
Daily Mail moved on from you to Meghan Markle, so you were absolutely fine in that.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah. Probably one of the hardest conversations was having to phone my mum, who I knew, because my mum has me on Google Alert, of course. Yeah, which is interesting, because I'm not the only Jane Ashcroft in the world. So she did once say to me, "What's this golf competition that you won?" And I said, "I don't play golf." And she said, "Well, Google told me that you'd won, and this golf competition was in America. There's an American golfer called Jane Ashcroft, or there was. Who knew?" So, yeah, I'm not that one. But yeah, I did have to say to my mum, because she said, Google says that you're a fat cat and you're paid this much money and stuff. So sometimes the family side of it can be entertaining as well.
But that's a really moot point, isn't it? Which I'd like to talk about is the personal and the work life. And that whole, we hear a lot these days about work-life balance and how, again, as not just as CEOs, but particularly post-COVID, I think, of how that we can make sure that we are really kind to ourselves and that we re-energize. And I talk a lot about that as well. And particularly with my painting, that is what kind of helps me and stuff. And that real sort of fine line between kind of your work life, your home life, your work persona, your home persona, you bring in your authentic self to work, all of these things now that we're trying to do and things that we've seen move, which I'm loving the fact that you can bring your authentic self to work. Because I think I've always done that, she says, with red hair and whatever. But for you as that CEO, really high kind of expectation of you, reputationally, 12 years leading one of the biggest, largest organizations. How did you feel about kind of work-life balance, personal life, work life? How did you navigate all of that for you?
To me, and I think we're all different and we have to find our own way through. But for me, I don't have a work life and a home life. There aren't two Janes. Now, I think some people do, and perhaps it's partly because my out of work life is relatively simple, as I have a very supportive other half. who is brilliant. And that's a huge asset, having somebody who's got your back, both emotionally, but also practically. And Jonathan's a really good practical support, and not everybody's blessed with that. I haven't got kids, so I haven't got that challenge. And I really, the way that people navigate through parenthood and work life. And thank goodness that is much more doable. It's one of my reflections, really, that women leaders years ago, most women had to choose. And it's becoming more possible now for people to be able to be a brilliant parent, a brilliant leader, a brilliant woman, and all of that stuff. But I suppose work for me is an important part of who I am and what I do. So I used to, at Bromford, I used to run internal training stuff on time management and all those really good skills. And we'd have conversations about work-life balance. And I realized that I didn't need to have that absolute separation. So I don't mind the fact that work is generally in my head when I'm doing stuff that's in my own time, because I really enjoy. Now that is one of the luxuries of having roles like ours. So although they're demanding, we have a degree of control that we sometimes underestimate, I think. So yes, as a CEO, you've got so many stakeholders. The list is huge, isn't it? Your customers, your colleagues, your board members, your regulator, the media, everybody. However, there is a degree of control. And actually, it's only when you stop being a CEO, Debbie, that you suddenly understand I'm no longer the most important person in the room. I got quite used to being the most important. And thank you for saying I'm humble. I hope I'm not too up myself. But it was interesting post chief exec world that I thought, having been a chief exec for quite a long time, it had just become the norm that often, certainly internally, your job title means you have got, you are the most, and even if you don't behave like the most important person, you don't throw your weight around. And I think I went from my chief exec role straight into, it was the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, and I lived near Birmingham, and I volunteered. So day one of post Anchor, I finished at Anchor Thursday evening. I don't know. I came home from London with lots of lovely goodies from my colleagues, lots of lovely memories. And I got up early the next morning. I put on you would never have worn the uniform, Debs, for, oh my goodness. It was great.
I think I was like cringing and thinking about was it some sort of nylon of some sort?
It was very washable. It was very washable. So we had these very nice outfits to be volunteers. And I turned up for my volunteering stint and I was checking in other volunteers. So it was a real back office job, and it was great. There's a little group of us and we're all saying hello to each other. And of course you say, hello, where do you come from? Where do you live? What do you do? And, I'm Jane and I live just down the road. I'm about 10 minutes away from here. And how do I describe what I do? So I just said I was retired because that was the easiest thing. And learning point one, gosh, a retired woman with grey hair, that sounds pretty boring. Nobody was very interested. And then, so we were there was hundreds of volunteers, and our job was just scanning people in, giving them food vouchers for their breaks, trying to make people feel motivated and loved. It was fabulous being great. But the first hour I spent in my head reviewing the process because it wasn't working very well, and we all needed to sit in different places, and we needed to change the way that we were using the IT, and I suddenly realized that wasn't my job at all. It was somebody else's job, and I was not responsible. And I thought, I have felt responsible for everything that's happened for the last 12 years in many ways. And I'm not. I'm a tiny cog in a really big wheel, and I can sit here in my lovely orange and blue uniform, Peaky Blinders caps. We had Peaky Blinders caps. You would have liked that. And so the shock was quite phenomenal, but in a good way. And I'm used to that now. But it is interesting being the chief exec, what that carries with it is both a blessing and a huge challenge. And as you say, how you carve out time so that you don't just disappear into the Jane, the chief exec. And for me, time to reflect is important.
You run marathons as well. This is something else. This is another string to your bow that people probably don't know.
So when I became chief exec, if you'd have said to me, you knew me then, if you'd have said to me then that I would run a marathon, I would have bet you my house that I wouldn't do that, wouldn't I? I was not particularly physically active. I toddled around London and stuff, but I wasn't somebody for whom exercise was part of my life particularly. And one of the things and I think becoming chief exec was perhaps part of what was going on. I was really overweight when I got the chief exec job. And I knew I wasn't ill in any way. I felt relatively healthy. But there were a number of things that all occurred about the same time. So my mum had a hip replacement, and part of that, I think, my family they're all very tall. I'm the little one, and we've all typically been described as chunky, would probably be the word. My dad who had died a couple of years before, but my dad was diabetic. My mum had been diagnosed as diabetic. My brother had just been diagnosed as type 2 diabetic. And I'd had a health check and they said, oh, your sugar's a bit high. So I thought, So on the horizon, I could see diabetes and I could see hip replacements and stuff. I also, I think I was conscious that as the chief exec, I was the face of the organisation. And I kept having my blooming photograph taken and having to do a bit of video here and a bit of video there. And I also thought, hang on, if I can get this amazing job and perhaps even have a go at doing a decent job as chief exec, why can't I just get a bit of better control over my physical abilities and my health? So for a number of reasons, all these things I think were coming together in the subconscious, and I decided I'd do something about it. So over a period of time, I lost 5 stone. And as part of that journey, somebody told me about Couch to 5K, which is a brilliant little podcasty app thing. And it's a 9-week thing that gets you from couch to being able to run 5K. And I suppose I am quite stubborn. When I decide I'm going to do something, I do stick at it. And so I thought, I'm going to have to do these 9 weeks. And the great thing was you could do it on your own. So nobody needed to know what I was up to running. And as I went through it, I thought, this is actually I quite like this. And so by the time I got up to 5K, somebody told me about a park run, which is a wonderful thing, which is every Saturday morning in hundreds of thousands of parks across the UK and internationally, where people get together, run 5K. It doesn't matter how slow you are, you can walk it. It's a really lovely, wonderful thing. I love park run. And and then all of a sudden I'm doing 5K on a Saturday, and then somebody tells me about a 10K that's quite fun and blah, blah, blah. So I did end up, I've run one marathon in 2017. I've done quite a lot of halves and that kind of stuff, but running became for me more of a mental health benefit really than physical. The physical stuff's fun, but it's that space to just go for a half-hour run. And so I think it was quite interesting how this was accepted. People at work were talking about this because there was a lot of interest in, how did you shift that weight? But for me, what it exemplified was finding something that gives you a bit of space. That's what it's finding your thing.
I've been preaching on about that for a while. My whole styling it out thing, that's exactly where I was coming from just some time ago with that. And you've got to style it out and find your thing. And I think when I found my thing, although I already knew it was my thing, because I've always wanted to paint. Your running was a different thing. I've always been creative and painting and stuff. But I suppose when I channeled it to help me, then I think that was enabled me, I think, to think also that I could do that kind of CEO job.
And being able to talk about it, because actually, if I think back to the early days of my career, when I worked in the electricity industry, senior people didn't have a life outside. Whereas now, I think that bringing your whole self to work and being and I think one of the challenges of being a chief exec is that, isn't it? It's like most of the time bringing your whole self to work and being that full human being. And then there's times in this job where you just have to do the focus thing. And that's the kind of the real thing, like on reflection, how you maintain your integrity and you are consistent and you're always you, but you do have to have a range of approaches and styles depending on what's going on in your organization at that point in time. But people have to be able to see that's not just, Jane's not had some strange turn and been reinvented. So for me, I'm naturally consultative. I like to know what people think about things. The best ideas in any organization come from the people who are involved in doing stuff. Just because you're senior doesn't mean you know more. And there are times when you are the person that just has to go, no, we're doing it that way. And knowing when you are that kind of benign dictator and when you are that fully consultative leader, isn't it? And working your way through that. And there's no book that tells you how to do that.
No, there's absolutely not. Okay, where's the next chapter for you then? The teacher, the learner, the educator, the marathon runner, the kind of the CEO extraordinaire, the whole thing. But you are not a retired lady with grey hair. So just tell me, because where am I going next? Because I tend to follow you in that kind of way, in that kind of educational way. So where am I going next?
gosh, don't follow me. I'll follow you as well. And that's what's lovely about this stuff. We all learn from each other, don't we? Which is brilliant. The decision to stop being a chief exec and to leave Anchor was quite a lengthy gestation in my head as I retired. And even that word, I can't quite work out. So I started talking to my chair at Anchor and said, look, I've been with the organization like 21 years. I've been chief exec for 11 years or whatever. It's right for me and right for Anchor. My driver was the kind of pull factor for me was there's other things I want to do. I am conscious while I'm in the aging world and I'm all about active aging and positive aging and living the best and longest life you can. There are things you can't control. I've lost people relatively young in my family, and I didn't want to be one of those people who, I'm assuming I'm going to live to 100, but that might not be true. And so I do want to make sure I do stuff while I can. So I want to travel. I haven't traveled very much. I want to see more of the world. I want to do different things. I want to use my skills and my learning in different sectors and learn about other things as well. So there were various pull factors. And there was also a bit of and I was tired. Let's not underestimate, no matter how resilient we are and how many kind of other passions we've got, you have to throw yourself into a CEO job. It's a huge privilege and it's a lifestyle. And I really didn't want to resent the organization and the job because I loved it. So I wanted to leave while I loved it. And I wanted to leave before I was thinking, I'm too tired or I can't face doing this again. There are times when another budget round and you start to think, oh, really? Got to get through this again. And also I didn't want people in the organization to be saying, when's she going to wander off? So there were lots of things that came together and I thought, okay, so I set an indicative timetable for when I thought it was right for me and right for Anchor. And so that turned out it's 2 years ago, a couple of weeks ago, actually. And my intention was to then put together a kind of flexible portfolio of interesting things. And it's quite fascinating, really, how I wasn't concerned. I'm quite happy with uncertainty. And I think I can't remember if that's how I've always been or if that's circumstances. Being a CEO, you have to get used to. Anything could happen, couldn't it? You have to have a plan and you have to be ready to rip up the plan. Whether that's the austerity budget, oh blimey, where did the rent go for 4 years? Or whether it's a couple of key people who have a new job and they disappear, or something really tough happens in the organization and you have to pivot to that, or a new opportunity comes, whatever.
Like
so
huge pandemic.
That thing. Yeah, blimey. So I was quite happy to step off the edge. Fortunate that I could step off the edge and not be too anxious about it. It's a combination of I was fairly confident I could find interesting things to do and that I would have something useful to offer. I do realise when I was working full time, I've got girlfriends locally who I go to the theatre with, and it's really funny because now they say, oh yeah, so you'll be able to come for the meal beforehand. You won't just be scooting in at 7:25 and landing in a seat with your briefcase on your lap like you used to.
So to wrap this up then, Madame, we talked learning, we've talked education. I'm really going to throw this out there, but what is the biggest thing you've learned in life? It's fun. I'm going a little bit existential. So yeah, what's the biggest thing you've learned in life?
One thing. Okay. I think a lot of my sort of life lessons are around the importance of self-awareness. So I come back quite often. I find this in coaching and for myself, that actually being able to understand yourself is an underrated attribute. And that's both knowing what your skills are and what you're good at and not being afraid to name those. And that's quite hard for me because I've got the imposter syndrome bag well and truly on my back. But being honest with yourself and knowing what you are good at and accepting. And then also the stuff that you find difficult. I think, and on the back of that, actually the kind of leaning into the tough stuff sometimes. So the times in not just in my career, but in my life where I've learned the most are the hard things, really. When the tough stuff happens, then recognizing that Okay, now I'm going to get to one thing, actually. I can summarize this. It's this too shall pass. So if you come across this expression, this too shall pass, I think it's a Buddhist, originally it's founded in Buddhism, isn't it?
Yeah.
But that concept that no matter what you're going through, it won't last. That's a better description than my self-awareness. So when it's really tough, it won't be tough forever. And you have to keep going and you have to work through it. And when it's really good, it won't be like that forever. So enjoy it.
Love it.
So I think that's what I'm going to end up with.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Loved it.
It's been lovely talking to you.
Yeah, you too. And just carry on educating us all. Yeah. Thank you.